So thank you everyone for being here. It is really wonderful, to have all of you join us today. Hopefully more people will be coming in. But uh, the topic for today that we're discussing is climate is more than one story. There is a discussion about, how there is a footprint, that productions have, and, there's a session that, was held earlier. We're going to talk about the brain print, that the entertainment industry has, and how can we reflect more climate and sustainability in the content that is being put out. So there is a big changing reality, and it's we cannot escape that. It is very much in our face, and the session today will talk about how we're going to address that. And I have a short presentation. The way we will do it is another 10 minutes, and then I will introduce the wonderful panelists that we have here, who will throw insight on how we can get storytellers to take the topic of climate and sustainability and just spread it wider. So climate is already telling its story. It has a bigger budget, as they say, than Hollywood and the Indian film industry combined. And it is putting up a very fantastic show. We're seeing disasters and all kinds of bad things that you could possibly see. And the thing to know is that picture abhi baki hai. So this is not the finale yet. And storytellers, people in this room, who tell stories, actually get to write, the story that will come out, So you get to decide how this ends, irrespective of how it's happening. So we need new stories, and this is actually a very solvable crisis, So people don't necessarily understand, it looks very hopeless, So it's a solvable crisis, but we need, the right kind of stories, that can be created. The only kind of stories that are being written about this is or you see, sort of tend to see out there, are the disaster stories, So climate is more than one story. It is not just a disaster story. The one recent, story that woke me up, to this whole reality was Don't Look Up. So when I saw that, it's I'm sure a lot of you would have seen it, it's about what is, really happening. It is a little Western perspective on, the climate crisis. But it is, again, a very disaster, view of how this is turning out. So Hollywood is also sort of waking up, to what kind of climate stories exist. And there is a Hollywood Climate Summit, that has started since last year. The entertainment industry there is now bringing in a lot of people, associated with who can be scientists or who can be experts in various fields, and putting them together with the storytellers so we can reimagine the kind of stories that we can tell around climate change. So the new kind of stories, what will they be built of, or what will they be made of? And we're looking at logic and magic. So, logic aspect is the science, the data, the insights, which the scientists, which I follow on my timeline, they're very desperate, and they don't have the words, to tell those stories. And the magic is, it's the art and the heart, and the imagination that storytellers bring to this. And we need a combination of this, to tell the new kind of stories, and that's very important. So just how do we shed light on the logic aspect of it, I thought we should demystify the science a little bit, So this is, we understand the movie, Ded Ishq Kiya. It's the story about Ded Bukhar, that is the goal that the world has. Why Ded? Because we are at 1.1 degrees of, temperature rise, that the world is seeing, the global goal. And if I say Paris Agreement, 1.5 degrees, that doesn't make a lot of dent in the thinking, but 1.5 degrees is the goal the world is working towards, and we have to contain the temperature rise to that level. So that's what the world is working towards, and it has actually, the history of climate change is connected with the history of colonialism, and that's how it started. So the impact that we are feeling of the climate aspect has to look at telling stories which come in from that era. So climate problems are actually connected to sustainability solutions. So the goal is to cut emissions, And the emissions come from, these main sectors, So cities, for example, contribute about 75% of all emissions. So all of us actually are kind of, contributors, to the crisis. And, that's where the biggest bulk of consumption happens. We have transport, we have food, and we have fashion. So fashion is a very big contributor as well. Food is almost 25% of emissions, and we are looking at making food, sustainable. We are looking at making transport sustainable. We are looking at energy, making sustainable. So the problem is emissions from those sectors, and the solutions are all sustainability related. So climate and sustainability are very, very closely connected. And this piece of insight was actually going to define, a lot of the new kind of climate stories, that can be told. I'm not going to the details of this, but how do we put, so that little piece of logic, that we had, how do we put that into the magic, So these are all kinds of, different ways that, the climate stories can be told. So when we are saying sustainability is a solution, it is not just one aspect of it, right? So it is not just individuals getting sustainable, or it's not just about, the government making policies. Business has a very, very big role. Policy has a very big role. Individuals have a very big role. So each of those, become different kinds of stories. So the easiest entry point is looking at climate-friendly behaviors, So you're able to infuse, behaviors into any kind of, story that you may have, and that has an individual aspect to it. We are looking at behaviors like, so UK, there is a show called Love Island, which is now combining and, collaborating with eBay, to have sustainable fashion, in there. So they're addressing, the sustainability in fashion aspect, that exists. We have climate mentions, So why we say about climate mentions? This is about including climate in the dialogue, So can we have not just the disaster piece, but the food piece, how can we build that into the dialogue? How can we build the transport piece, into the dialogue? So people actually having a conversation, about these topics, which is currently, quite missing, from mainstream. Looking at climate characters, So climate has a very strong, there are two aspects to it. One is the impact, that it's going to make, and India is going to be one of the worst hit. And second is the solutions, bit of it, which is, looking at businesses or anybody who's going to try to cut emissions, So if we're looking at climate characters, how can we have a character who is impacted, stories of people who are impacted, that will be very important. Can we look at, from the solution side, can we look at businesses, that are doing a very good job at, cutting emissions? Can we look at a climate entrepreneur, Can we look at stories, for climate entrepreneurs, who are doing a lot of great work on the ground? Can we, eco-dating? So I just read an article which says, that there is a decline in how dating apps are being used, so in India. So eco-dating is actually a thing, So how about having characters about people who share the same green causes? It's actually a thing, right? So these are all the realities on the ground, that are the shifts that are happening, and how can we build that into the kind of characters we build? So I was talking about sustainable food. So the government is now talking about millets. You would have seen a lot of news around millets. So millets are a climate-friendly food. So how do we build millets? In one of the genres. So one example that came to mind was, how do we look at, say, khichdi? Is comedy, right? How about we make something on bajre ki khichdi? Bajra is millets, and how can we have Hansa and Praful talking about climate in a very funny, silly way, It's a serious topic, but how do you bring levity to it and, make it conversational and interesting, So those are ways, to bring the different kind of characters. And one important thing is, climate world, How do you create an entirely new world, which either could be in the future, which is a hopeful, aspirational world and not just the disaster stories, or could you create a story about people who are already creating that world today, So the businesses, working on it, or their entrepreneurs, working on it, root it in the reality, that exists today with all the, different kind of nuances, that will come about in this. So the climate world is, one more aspect of it, and the love for nature. I think we cannot address climate change without, addressing nature, without preserving and regenerating nature. So there was a time when we used to have beautiful stories about, Hathi Mere Sathi, or, it's the love of nature. They were mainstream films, we've just stopped making them. It's certainly all very city life, and, it's what we do here. So how do we reconnect, with nature? half of global GDP comes from nature, climate change threatens that. So having to understand and get closer to nature and films, to be able to do that. So we saw Elephant Whisperer, it's nature. This year's, Hollywood, the Oscar shortlist is a Kerala film, it's about the Kerala floods, and it talks about collaboration and how the community came together to address that. So I think those stories of hope and looking at that from that kind of lenses is very important. And Netflix has an initiative called Flip the Script on sustainability. So they have like 200 titles already on Netflix. Majority of them don't even use the word climate, So a climate story doesn't have to use the word climate, So any aspect of sustainability which is addressing the climate problem, should be a climate story. So this is my final slide. It's just an introduction, on the demystification. This is really absolutely the biggest story, the greatest story that you as, storytellers will be able to tell. This is a very crucial time, for the world. We are in the last decade where we can actually turn around. We're the last generation alive that can actually stop the worst from happening. So we really, really need, storytellers, to be able to create the right kind of content, stories of collaboration and action and, courage and hope. And, they will be difficult, this is a difficult transition to make. And, but we do need, to storytellers to come together and tell the new kind of stories, that are really, really important for our time. So the greatest story you can ever tell. And that is my little introduction to this topic, just helping to demystify, what the shift is happening. And I'm very pleased to now, just call upon, all the panelists that we have, and we have a wonderful, lineup. And I want to first of all invite Dylan Gray. So Dylan is a filmmaker. Just applause for Dylan, please. Dylan is a filmmaker whose documentaries such as Fire in the Blood, From Durban to Tomorrow, and The King of Good Times have won scores of international awards and found major resonance among audiences worldwide. He's currently completing a feature documentary about a pioneer and leading voice of environmental sustainability in Indian business. So welcome, Dylan. Next, I'd like to invite Devashish Makhija. Devashish is a multiple award-winning Indian filmmaker, screenwriter, graphic artist, fiction writer, and poet. He is best known for writing and directing the critically acclaimed feature films Aji, Unga, and Bhosle, and most recently known for Joram, which is now being screened at the MAMI Festival. So welcome, Devashish. And I'd like to invite Rushi Sharma. Rushi, along with her longtime creative partner, Manoshi Nath, has over 2 decades of experience in the fashion space. And they have extensively worked on costume design in the Indian film industry since 2003, with over 40 critically and commercially successful films like Queen, PK, Khosla Ka Ghosla, Sherni. That's a lot of films, yeah? And they've just recently won the Elle Mindful Design Award for their work on sustainable design. So a round of applause for everybody. I'll just go take my seat and we'll start the Q&A. So thank you guys so much for being here today. The very first question that I'd like to ask, is what is the one sustainable habit you have or want to build in your day-to-day life? We'll start with Devashish.
I personally live a very hermit-like life. I try to occupy as little space as possible. So it's been 22 years in Bombay. I'm 4 films down. I still share a flat with 2 other people. I literally live out of a room, and I only live with 6 trunks. I don't own too much. I just have like 6 pairs of clothes. I try and keep my needs bare minimum and just focus on my work. So I'm trying to minimize that further. I'm unable to because I'm living in a city. Sometimes I wonder if I can continue living in the city if I want to reduce my carbon footprint further.
Wow, that is quite something. Fabulous. So what about you, Dylan?
Well, not quite as hermit-like as Devashish perhaps, but I try to keep things very simple in my life and think about the choices that I make. Avoid disposable clothing and disposable anything, actually. Really try to think about packaging and, if I see that plastic is being used, I try to reach out to the to the restaurant, to the vendors, to whoever, to let them know that there are options available. Trying to fly less, because it's a major contributor to, in general, transport choices. So, yeah, I mean, I think just being mindful of all the consumer choices that I make primarily.
Wonderful, thank you. What about you, Rishi?
Besides the usual suspects like avoiding plastic packaging and moving from shampoo bottles to shampoo bars, I think what Manushi and I are really getting into our private lifestyles is sourcing from homegrown brands. And I think in India, almost 60 to 70% of these brands are organic. And they're sourcing organic cotton, they're actually working towards employment for women in many states. So that is one thing which feels not only good on the skin, but good on the soul as well. And I think the future that I'm hoping I can get to would be working on a capsule wardrobe or wearing a uniform all the time. I think you'd be the best candidate for that. Creating a good silhouette that works, and then just continue wearing that.
Wonderful.
You know, quite like Albert Einstein, I actually romanticize the idea of having just one look and not having to think about what I'm going to get into every morning.
Yes, exactly.
I'm your best candidate. Yeah.
Mark Zuckerberg. I think also, I mean, you mentioned food. I mean, that's a really important part of it as well. Eating local food, avoiding, I mean, things like imported water or water that is shipped from distant parts of our own country. I mean, that's a huge waste that goes on.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I think when you mentioned food, it's a food waste is a very big part of climate change. So 1/3 of the world's food is wasted. So I think fantastic. Good to hear that. Thank you. Very sustainable folks here, the right people to have here on the panel.
We try.
So the next thing I want to ask is, and let's start with you, Dylan. Tell us about your approach to climate and sustainability through your work.
Well, I mean, I think as you mentioned, right now I'm just about to finish shooting a film which focuses on a character who is a champion of sustainability, but coming from an unusual angle in the sense that starting around 25 years ago as a leader of Indian business. He actually, put sustainability front and center, alongside, coupled with, a passion and an imperative for rural empowerment and rural employment, livelihoods, seeing, their businesses were working in various parts of the country which were suffering deep, deep poverty, and we're hemorrhaging young people to work in low-skilled jobs in the city, I think often sustainability is seen as something that is championed by kind of activists, tree huggers, if you want to use a pejorative term, or celebrities like Leonardo DiCaprio. So to see somebody who's coming at it from a business standpoint where they're not sacrificing the business, they're saying, okay, we also, we're taking from the country, we're taking from society and the community. We do have a responsibility to build society, build the community, build livelihoods, create prosperity also for the future of the country and those specific communities, especially where we work. There's a win-win for everybody there. And even on a business level, there might be a bigger initial investment, but over time it's been shown, and this is a great case study because it's gone on for 25 years with the multifaceted business where it ends up being a great business model as well. And it's specific, I think, especially interesting in an Indian context because there's been this whole idea that environmental concern is something that is sort of a Western luxury, it's frivolous, it doesn't apply to a country like India, which is trying to develop and industrialize, and it's almost like a Western conspiracy to keep India and China from truly reaching their potential of development. But that's really a false narrative, and India is really at the epicenter of climate change. We're seeing it now. We're seeing it with terrible air quality. We're seeing it with heat waves, with water shortages, which will lead to hunger, which will lead to desperation, which will lead to social unrest. We're seeing it in so many ways that will affect us much more than Western countries. So, it's really, it is up to us to take ownership of this. And the story I'm trying to tell, I think, will be a real eye-opener for a lot of people, and also put the onus on the business community, which is ultimately the biggest polluter in the country. And they certainly haven't done enough, and it's possible to show it can be economically viable, and it's the right thing to do, and others have done it. It's not a pipe dream.
Wonderful. I think for business, having an example of good business is so important. So the story you're telling of a business which is actually, making it work, it just looks difficult for businesses to follow, and, there is a lot of them are not doing it right, the way it should be done. So, wonderful. I think good to know, you're going to tell that story. So, Devashish, tell us about, the work. The work you do particularly, it addresses a lot of socio-political themes, which are for mainstream audiences. And, Dylan was talking about how there's going to be that impact, on the ground, and, you address those areas. So, tell us about, the work that you're doing.
So, I make a lot of short films, and I made a few feature films. It's almost a schizophrenic life, because with short films, I try to keep my carbon footprint really low. I shoot on phones. I shoot with crews of 2 or 3 people. And I shoot only in real locations. And I try to not leave a trail of litter when I shoot. But I cannot control that when I'm on a feature film, especially when it's with a star and when it comes with all that kind of baggage. But those films, like the current one, Joram, is the biggest film I've ever made. And it's got a climate message. It's about what we do to the land. But it left a trail of litter. It had a crew of 300 people. So I sometimes don't know if I am entitled to be sitting on a stage like this and talking about a topic this sensitive, because the fact that we are filmmakers by default is very anti-climate. Just look at the space we're sitting in, look at the technology we're using. We are leaving a carbon footprint as we speak. So is our art, this particular medium, is it sustainable? Maybe the world can do without it. Till about 130 years back, there was no cinema and there was live interaction, and nobody left a trail of litter in their wake when they did street theater or did live music or recited a poem or read from a book. So I feel too complicit to be able to have a stance on the matter.
Wow, that's a very interesting take on this. Yeah, I was just reading something about hypocrites unite. We're all hypocrites, in the journey. None of us are perfect, and it's so hard. I think we are all racked by that guilt. It's are we doing enough, or there's an indifference. People who are just sort of switching off from that. So. Yeah, I think we allow for that imperfection. So please continue making the films you're making.
So ultimately, I think it boils down to, and I'll speak for all of us, because I see all of us bothered by these things, and therefore we do what we do, is to choose your battles. Like, I can't help making films, so I choose to put this in my stories and go to sleep every night thinking that, okay, I did my bit, maybe it's not enough, but I won't stop putting it in my stories because I don't know what else to do.
Yeah, and I think those stories are so needed, it's, that's why we're here, I think we need you to continue telling these stories, because that's what will bring about the change, Thank you for that. So Rushi, tell us, about how you're addressing, the themes through our work, through your work.
I very much agree with Devashish that we all are, I think, powered by our guilt. And I think that's what happened with Manushi and me. We've been working towards sustainable fashion and trying to make costume design a little more circular in the film industry for many years now. We've been taking baby steps towards it. And, it was in COVID that we realized that baby steps is not going to cut it. And we feel too strongly about it, and we should do a little more. There's this quote by Ellen MacArthur Foundation. It's a charity foundation for making the economy circular. And it says, waste should be turned into an opportunity. And that's where we got an idea. We said, let's not start with a new idea. Let's start with an existing problem of waste in the industry. It's huge. It could last us decades. We would need to make no new costumes. So we have brought back a lot of dead stock back into circulation in every film that we work on. And it's not an easy task, because as a designer, as a creator, we all want to start from scratch. But to start building like a Lego block on someone else's creation and turn that into radical upcycling, recycling, even downcycling, is a job, but I think we are quite excited to do it. And it's taking us places. I mean, we've spoken to some producers. You know, with producers, like you talked about the business, it's sensible business. To tell a producer that we can save on the budget by recycling all your stock that you have in go downs. You know, don't let it go into the landfill. Let's divert it from the landfill back into circulation. So that is the next step, and we're hoping that it's going to help in some way.
Wonderful. That's great to hear. I just read, a statement by the British Fashion Council, which says that we have enough clothes on the planet to dress up the next 6 generations of the human race. You know, next 6 generations. We don't need to buy any clothes. You know, I think this is one industry. You know, we use just so much costumes and so much fashion. So this is so needed. And I think going beyond sometimes it just may be lip service, and it was not really being sustainable, but it's so good to hear that you're actually trying to bring about that change.
If I may add something, like just the opening night at Mami, I mean, don't get me wrong, but on the red carpet, when I saw all those costumes, I'll call them costumes because they won't be used a second time, like look at all that garbage. So I don't know how do we step out completely out of this loop is impossible to engender, but this is what we can do as in, find.
It's just change in behavior and mindset. Do you know there is a brand in Amsterdam? It's called Mud Jeans. Next time you're there, you must visit. They actually lease you jeans. They clean in certain way that it makes it absolutely brand new, and you can lease it for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 6 months, and you go and return it. And it's just a beautiful brand. It just needs a mindset for us to be able to wear second-hand clothing.
Yeah, that's I think quite true. Just bringing about that shift. I was reading also about this company called Rent the Runway. Which just rents high-end fashion costumes and dresses. So I think it's a huge shift in thinking, and we need to bring it mainstream. And it's good to know that you're on this. So just as a follow-up question, it's when you start working on the costume bit, it comes in after the script has been written usually. So how do you build that in? How do we bring that as part of actual content on screen?
That's very interesting. That's a very interesting question, and you're right. Scripting is almost always scripting is done. There's a little change in the pattern now. Manushi and I are called even before the actor is, there's a committed actor on board to make presentations and to actually, because we as costume designers are more character designers. So we not only just design the clothes, but we design the character. A shirt and a pant is not just shirt and a pant. It's a particular costume which talks about the social strata of the character. It talks about the background of the character. It talks about the emotional arc of the character in a particular scene. It talks about the transformation. So it's very easy for us to actually create climate arc in the costume, to create habits, behaviors, pattern changes in the costume, like in the character. Like, for example, if a character is just choosing eco-friendly clothing, or the character is driving an EV, or, if you remember in about 20 years back, if a character is mending the jeans or mending the clothes, it meant this is a poor character, lower middle class. I think that kind of behavior and that kind of change in the mindset that this boy is sitting at home and mending his jeans means that he's an aspirational character. This is the aspiration. This is what we should be looking forward to. Most of the directors tell us that make my characters aspirational. I think these are the small things that we can induce into the character arc of a film. Also, I want to just add one more thing. We feel that these small things are missed. Manushi and I had designed a character queen, and we had given a green sweatshirt to Kangana which said Alice in Wonderland. And it was supposed to be an inside joke that nobody's going to pick on this. And you have no idea how many interviews we've given talking about this particular sweatshirt because it was such strong subtext. So it's not that the audience misses these small repetitive messaging or, positive nudges.
Wonderful. That's so good to hear. I think idea is also to make sustainable behaviors cool. So how do you make them mainstream? Currently, like you said, it's like mending is something little down market. I don't know. How do you make those cool? Wonderful. So my next question, both to Dylan and to Devashish, starting with Dylan, it's your documentary, Fire in the Blood. It altered a global conversation on access to essential medicine, So how do you look at, the documentary audience, and creating films that have that kind of impact? Because one is the mainstream thing, and we talk about the general audience, and individual behaviors have to be changed, but the big change will happen with how businesses change. And how do you create those kind of impact in the business stories, even though it has a limited or a smaller audience?
Well, it's not easy. I think you really have to give a lot of thought to that, to be honest. And when I meet filmmakers or even producers who want me to make films, or filmmakers who come to me with ideas and are interested in my feedback or collaboration, that's the first question is, what do you really want people to take away from it? And who is your audience? And of course we all want to have as wide an audience as possible, but there's always a specific audience that will, there's a target audience for things. And every film should have it. And it's amazing how few filmmakers that can actually answer that question. So, if you're trying to impact social change and tell the story of change, I mean, of course, hope is a big part of it. Inspiration, people that have actually, gone from a position of no power to a position of power, in a sense of being able to reclaim a space. And they're almost a proxy for the audience to be able to feel less powerless. And I think that's a very important thing. Also, to understand that elites fundamentally don't want change. So I remember I was on the jury for a few years of this. Yes Bank was doing these films for social change. And every year I would say, but we have to acknowledge Yes Bank doesn't want social change. It's not their fault. I mean, why would they? The elites, whether they be social elites, economic elites, political elites, they don't want it. So, it's something that has to come from beneath. And we talk about climate change, as I said, affecting India and I truly believe this is the epicenter of this problem. And we feel it every day. I mean, I've got a cough right now because I just came back from a clean place abroad, and suddenly it hits me when I come back to Mumbai that, it's harder to breathe. You're getting, pollution stuck in your throat. You feel kind of oppressed by the air around you. That's a problem, So I think, when it came to Fire in the Blood, I started from a position of real outrage and anger, but I knew that for the film to work and to reach a large number of people, it really had to find those characters, even if you're being a little bit manipulative and in the way you sort of structure the story, in order to pull the audience along on their journey, who could really give the audience the idea that any kind of change is possible, no matter how daunting the problem may be. And self-interest, I have to say, plays a huge part in it, because with that film, for example, I mean, I traveled to many countries, and there are always social and cultural differences. But when it comes to Q&A, it's really, really often not so much the empathy for the millions and even tens of millions of people who died unnecessarily because of lack of access to medicine, but it was really about how they were being manipulated by drug pricing, by pharma monopolies and things like that, and what it meant for their future, for their families. So, just making it personal for people, understanding doing nothing is actually doing something. You're taking a position by doing nothing, because this will not just stay as it is right now. This will go in a direction where you have even less power and even less control, and a lot more problems will come your way. So, to really, I mean, not to make it a negative message, but to show there are people who are doing things proactively, and you can be one of those people. You can take a small part in it, you can take a big part in it. It's your choice, something in between. But to really make it clear that the so-called leaders of society are very unlikely to be the ones that drive this. They have to be the ones that we push. And they are fundamentally reactive. If we're talking about policymakers and even businesses, they're fundamentally reactive. If they see that there's genuine interest in something, there's genuine belief that the status quo is not acceptable, they will adapt, and they will they will react, and change will happen. So I mean, that's part of, you know, if you're making a film, like say a documentary, which has an aim to really move people and have social impact, and also really stick in the mind. I mean, I think as filmmakers and storytellers, a big part of what we always think about is like, you know, how do we make our projects memorable, you know, so that it's not just entertainment that is sort of forgotten tomorrow. Because, you know, I see so many of these streaming series, for example, that are very well crafted and very well performed, but 2 days later, I mean, you've forgotten them. We don't want to do that. We want to have something which people take something away from, can talk about passionately, be a conversation starter, really, you know, make a mark on them. And that we have a lot of power in that sense, you know, and you know, how, as frustrating as many of these things that, you know, Devashish also articulated are, you know, one of the great things that about what we do is that, you know, I've just been astounded by the power that we can have if we really bring that belief and passion and intellect to these problems. I mean, with Fire in the Blood, I mean, I continually be so grateful that actually that story sort of landed in my lap, and it's had such a it's made such a monumental change. It's changed laws. You know, it's like every article that's written about that topic is very clearly influenced by that film. Whereas before there was just a lacuna. It was a barren landscape. So, you know, that's just one film that really could have a huge impact, and also be very inspired by those people. You know, I mean, to really say, okay, whatever problems I think I may have, you know, these people have really done something that has changed the world. So it doesn't just apply to that one topic. It's possible on any number of topics. And, you know, I think that's very energizing for the audience.
Thank you so much. That was so insightful just to hear, you know, and I think we need lasting change, you know. The climate crisis is a crisis of inaction, right? You know, so there's just not enough people acting, you know, so we're able to make those kind of films, you know, that have such a huge impact, you know, so even with the smaller audience, or, you know, it is not a mainstream film, but, you know, it can make, you know, really things change on the ground. So thank you for that. So Devashish, you address a lot of, you know, socio-political issues, you know, in your films, you know, talking about the underdog, you know, it's people who are very highly impacted. What is the appetite, you know, for those kind of films? And, you know, Dylan was talking about, you know, taking on big business, and when you're talking about conflict at that level, you know, so we still need to make sure these films are, you know, amplified, and, you know, they reach, you know, the right kind of audience. So how do you see the industry open to, you know, these kind of films?
See, I'm a cynical voice as opposed to Dylan's, because even though I have tried very hard to place these very difficult questions under the veneer of thrill and crime and drama, my films don't reach out as widely as I always hope for them to. But that said, with every film, I'm trying to push that envelope a little further, like with Joram as well. I mean, when I'm saying push the envelope further, not in terms of content, but in terms of canvas. Because a film needs to reach wider for it to have a more compelling and more lasting impact. So the questions I'm raising and the rage that I operate from is unchanged. It's just the canvas keeps expanding with every successive film. And like I said earlier, I leave a bigger carbon footprint with each one. So I don't know what to really, what to say in defense of what I do, but I'll actually divert this conversation and take it somewhere else. So because I live that slightly hermit-like life, I tend to, I mean, I do that very consciously. So that when I write characters, when I'm drawn to certain subjects and the choice of stories that I tell, they are inhabited by characters who also occupy less space and get by with much less. So when I'm watching a film and say, I'll take the risk of quoting an example, say a Rocky or Rani ki Prem Kahani. You see two people in a room that large, that becomes the aspiration for the audience. They want a room that large. But if we start writing those same scenes in a room much smaller, the aspiration hasn't changed. You're still aspiring to be those two people, but you're normalizing their requirement of a space not so large. So even when I put three characters traveling in my films, I stick all three of them on one bike. I'm like, they're getting by with less, so that you can get by with less too. So I consistently try to normalize using less, occupying less, getting by with less in my stories, and in very tacit ways. And often other filmmakers try to do it when they're not living that life. You can sense that they're romanticizing it. But because I live that life, it hopefully just comes in without you noticing it. And then you feel it's okay to do that when you're doing the same thing in your life. So that's something that really drives me in my storytelling.
And I think that's a great insight. That's a great insight. I think earlier making a mention of, 2/3 of all emissions come from lifestyles, So how we bring about that change, and, also to Rushi's point on, it's just aspirational to do things which are high carbon, right?
Like, these really large cars that suddenly have come to India in the last 3 years, I stand by the roadside sometimes and I count, at least 90% of them have one person inside them. I'm like, why are we not taxing them 4 times more than a normal car? So a big car will never find space in my film. Even if that person is wealthy, by default, because that person's in my film, that person will use a smaller car, and I will not let the audience notice that it was a very conscious choice. I want to normalize the presence of a smaller car.
I think that's great. I think planet placement, how do you make sure that there are those subtle references, which the audience takes away. So I think my follow-up question, and Dylan for you and also for Rushi, we're talking about sustainable lifestyles, but how do we normalize this in the mainstream? I mean, would you have a take on that? How do you normalize sustainable behaviors and making low carbon behavior, cool in different genres?
I mean, I think, see, I'm working on different types of films maybe than my colleagues here, but the thing that, for me, it always comes back to, empowerment. Empowering the viewer as a citizen to think of the public interest. And the public interest is to tackle this problem. And we all have our part, right? So that I think, the resistance that comes with a lot of these issues, and climate is just one of them, is that people feel like there's really nothing I can do. So it's actually, it's very easy for them to just put it off their plate. So either by showing that people can do even small things that can have, cumulatively a very big impact, but also consciously considering these questions, consciously being a thinking citizen is very important, Don't just let things happen to you. Don't just accept what you're fed. I mean, it's interesting now with all that's going on in the Middle East, or sorry, I should say West Asia. Don't use the Orientalist term. But, we're fed a lot of narratives. And there's a big pushback when you don't accept them. But, then you find a lot of resonance among your colleagues, your friends, your fellow citizens. Because it's like, no, we were not just going to eat what we are fed. No, we do have a role to play in this. And let's listen to those who are actually working on this. And we don't have to take every part of it unto ourselves, but to be a critical thinking citizen. And it doesn't have to be like a very weighty negative thing, It can be, as both of these colleagues of mine have mentioned, it can be just in your personal choices, expressed as a very natural thing, to decide not to contribute to the problem and to discuss it openly, either whether it be fiction or nonfiction, that doesn't matter, but to really normalize the idea that we as citizens have a say and we have a role to play, and it's not just a given that we should just accept everything that comes down from on high. And that includes the pressures of fashion, social media, and all those things. I mean, I have a teenage son. You see it very strongly, that these things are pushed so strongly on them. And it's, at the root of it, it's always money. It's always money, it's always big business. There's invariably a cost, not just to the environment, to people's health, to people's mental health. And, I think we've reached a point where we really have to be conscious and pushing back at all of this and saying, what kind of life do we want to live? What kind of place do we want to live in? What kind of community do we want to have? What kind of country do we want to have? What kind of world do we want to have? I mean, not every single person is going to have the answers to those questions, but just to think like, we're here. We need to stake our claim. We need to take our spot in this world and be heard. And to also listen to those who we instinctively feel are actually acting in the best interest of the community, of all of us, rather than just in their own self-interest, and pushing us to do things which actually create clutter and stress in our lives. And materialistic consumption is a major problem. And that comes into fashion, that comes into everything that Devashish was saying as well, in terms of living space, in terms of cars. I feel like, honestly, a lot of this stuff, and again, maybe I look at it differently because I'm a parent and I have a child who's at that age where so many of these things are, these ideas are being pushed and also being formed, that a lot of it has to do with, flaws in the education system as well. So I had gone to college in North America and seeing how, like, even at that point in time, so many people getting into debt, just buying junk, just all this disposable junk that creates huge stress on them, even to the point of suicide in certain cases. I mean, why are we doing this? The elites of society, it works for them because it puts money in their pockets, right? And the same goes with climate and so many other things. But it's like, to teach kids even at a very young age, and as parents and also in the education system, that, this is not good for the environment. It's not good for your mental health. It's not good for society. You don't need to do it. You don't need to be part of this game. You have choices. And I think the nice thing about the democratization of communications that we have, which includes social media, is that you're not just limited to those official voices, those sanctioned voices, those corporate voices, even those government voices, which really actually just work on behalf of business elites. So, it's great that there is a proliferation of platforms, although we see the limitations of it currently, where people are sort of banned from expressing their opinions, but it still exists. There's still some methods available to express ourselves, and this is, I think, as a baseline, to kind of inspire the public to stand up for themselves and to say, I have choice.
Okay, good. Thank you. Very insightful. So we have some time left. But just one last question, before we just ask the audience, for a couple. If you had one crazy idea for a film or documentary that you could make to solve climate change, and you magically had all the money that was needed to make the film, what one film would you make? So, would you like to see? I think with the Rushi, what one film would you like to see? The crazy idea.
I'm a costume designer, so I'll talk about a costume drama. I think I'll make a period film on Mahabharat, but fighting the climate change. The Pandavas are the climate warriors and the Kauravas are the climate deniers or the indifferent. And the text that comes out of it, Gita, should be the behavior towards climate, not behavior towards religion or, anything else, but just the climate.
Wow, that is very, very unique. I think it builds in just the current flavor of today, so it brings in all those elements and we make it really very relevant. Wonderful. No. So we don't have all the money yet for you, it was, but hopefully, you will find money, to watch that film. Somebody will make it. So Devashish, what would be your one crazy film that you will make? You have all the money. And what will you do?
I would say if I had all the money, that would leave a trail of destruction. So, so let's keep the money aside. But in a parallel reality, if there is that one story that needs to be told, I hope it doesn't become a film. I hope it's told, and I hope it becomes the oral tradition. I just hope it's a parallel reality where the Industrial Revolution did not happen, and where the oral tradition that India actually owns has a story that talks about sustainable living so intrinsically with nature that you can't imagine yourself extricated from it, and modern civilization never began.
Wow, that is, I think, will be fantastic. And, you know, I was reading somewhere that India can teach sustainability to the world. You know, it's we have lived that way for thousands of years. And, you know, it's the industrialization. Colonization, yeah, it's a climate change is the history of, you know, it's tied so closely with that, you know. So if that had not happened, you know, we would not have this and we are suffering it. So, wow, I would watch that film, you know. Thank you.
Too.
Listen
to the story.
It's a story, oral tradition, you know, passed down from person to person, you know, brilliant, wonderful. Thank you. So, Dylan, what would be your one crazy film you will make?
I don't know if it's crazy. I mean, again, I think that, you know, playing into that, the idea that consumption is a false god, you know, that has really enslaved us and poisoned us, and made us ill and sick and sad, you know, and I mean, I think that people can identify that with that when it's really sort of, you know, put before them, despite all the noise that is giving them the other signal. But in terms of a film, you know, I think I'm actually working on another film which deals with a global kind of phenomenon and issue. And the thing that excites me about that one is that we have people in different parts of the world looking at it from different angles. And this one also, I mean, this is, if you talk about climate, it means so many things. There's so many ways that as individuals, people can do their part, and they are doing their part. And even people that are tackling it on other types of levels, from different angles and different perspectives, so that it's not, as you said, I mean, as the sort of the title of the session is, it's, you know, it should never be seen as one thing. It'll never end. It'll never be, you know, you'll never reach the ultimate goal of a completely environmentally sustainable or positive, you know, world. But there's loads we can do, obviously, and there are loads that people are doing who are very inspiring and positive in their outlook, because ultimately, you know, dour stories of tales of woe are very difficult to get people to watch. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, when I meet with documentary filmmakers, and you know, they're making a lot of very serious films, but you know, if you tell the full truth, often, I mean, this is, you go to film festivals and things, you talk to the other filmmakers, the thing that often comes up is that you can't tell the full truth. People won't believe it often, because they just can't believe things are as bad as they really are. When you've spent years researching them, you find out you have this idea at the beginning, usually it's worse than you think when you dig into it. But that narrative is very, very difficult to, and understandably, even I often, you know, late at night, I shy away from watching those very heavy films that are going to make me feel bad about things that are happening in the world. So you do need to find, you know, empowerment and hope in your characters, and there are there are millions of stories like that out there, and it's nice to see, you know, in a way, to create a little community in your film where you're showing people looking at things from different angles, coming from top to bottom to, you know, different approaches, the very local approach to a global approach. They're out there doing it, and that, you know, it's sort of the signal for the audience is, you know, there is a path forward, and that even, you know, you can do it in the small way, you can do it in the big way, you can be the, you know, if you're an extrovert, you can go out and rally people around and really, you know, devote your life to it, or just, you know, as a normal citizen, just do a few small things that will be part of the solution.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Thomas, for those insights. So we have about 7 minutes left, you know, so if anybody has a question, you know, it's we'd love to answer. Can somebody pass the mic, please?
Hello. Yeah, good evening, friends. Interacting in MAMI Film Festival. And the topic, climate, that's why I'm here. I'm the maker of Srishti Chakra film, which got 17 International Film Festival on climate. सृष्टि चक्र का एक पूरा एक सर्कल है. जीवन का जो चक्र है वो क्लाइमेट से कैसे जुड़ा हुआ है, एंड हाउ दिस इज डिस्टर्ब बाई, हमने पृथ्वी से हर चीज़ लिया है. वी हैव एक्सप्लॉइटेड द अर्थ, वी हैव नॉट गिवन एनीथिंग टू द अर्थ. तो ये फिल्म के डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन के लिए मैं जियो और आप सब पैनलिस्ट को आमंत्रित करता हूँ. मेरा नाम चंपक बैनर्जी है. सृष्टि चक्र का फिल्म का जो क्लाइमेक्स है, जिसमें एक कपल, बच्चे किस ढंग से नेचर से इंटरैक्ट करते हैं, नेचर से सीखते हैं और मेरे ख्याल से ये हर फेस्टिवल में बेस्ट फिल्म का अवार्ड लिए. तो आई वांटेड डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन पार्ट फॉर द फिल्म. मैं आप सबको आमंत्रित करता हूँ. एक शॉर्ट फिल्म है, जल जंगल जमीन का रिश्ता यूं ही बना रहे, प्रभु रिश्ता यूं ही बना रहे. देश की माटी, देश का जल, हवा देश की, देश के फल सरस रहे, प्रभु सरस रहे. हर एक गांव का, हर एक जन का मनुष्य साक्षात साक्षर रहे, प्रभु साक्षर रहे. जल जंगल जमीन का रिश्ता यूं ही बना रहे, रिश्ता यूं ही बना रहे. तो आई वुड लाइक टू इनवाइट everybody here
So
to watch my
this
film.
is a question and answer session.
Yeah.
So it's not fair to really pitch your film like this
Okay,
on a mic
okay.
because there'll be other filmmakers who can do the same thing.
Yeah, I invite you.
No, but
can
it's
invite
a very unfair thing to do because it's a panel and you're supposed to be asking questions. It's not fair to be pitching your film like this क्योंकि यहाँ पे 10 और filmmaker हैं, फिर सबको बारी-बारी mic देनी पड़ेगी ना.
नहीं नहीं,
I think it's all right. I think it's okay. I know I take Devashish's
Yeah.
point, and I think thank you for
Yeah.
those insights.
Yeah.
So can we have, and the other gentleman had a question.
Anybody can come.
Should I stand up? Or
It's
yeah.
fine.
Why anything with a sustainability tag is pricey? If it consumes less energy, if it depletes less environmental resources, why it is priced higher? Like sustainable fashion, or in Mumbai, even some builders are selling flats with a sustainable tag, sustainable housing, and they are pricing it at a much higher level. If it consumes less resources, it should be cheaper.
So which one of you would like to answer that, Dylan?
Well, I have a bit of insight into this. I mean, the film I'm working on right now, as I mentioned, it involves a business figure who was leading basically a conglomerate which has many different businesses. It is often the case that the investment required at the beginning is much higher. So you have to take a long-term view, which over time will pay off. Of course, if you're talking about niche products which are being marketed more to the upper end of the market, then they will seek to recoup that money in the end user price immediately, which will result in what you're talking about, in the sense of it becomes a premium product. But in terms of mass scale up of sustainable practices, over time businesses will actually find it to be much more efficient and they will have enhanced profitability. It's just a question of whether they're willing to take that long-term view. Most businesses in India traditionally have not been willing to. It depends also on the type of business they do, whether they have the capital or the margins to be able to do it. But many could do it and they don't because they work on very short-term calendars. I don't know if that totally answers your question, but I think that, as you said, in many countries, whether food is a perfect example, where something is listed as organic, it often has this sort of artisanal tag on it, becomes much more expensive than the mass-produced food, which is very low-quality food, but it's cheaper. And there's this famous story about shoes. A man, can only afford a $10 pair of shoes. That somebody can afford the $100 pair of shoes that will actually outlast 20 of those cheaper pairs of shoes. But the customer who doesn't have the money will often have to be forced almost to buy the low quality cheaper shoes that will not last. And similarly with food, in the poorer neighborhoods in many countries, not so much in India because of course India there still has people still often shop for real produce, from vendors, but in other countries like United States, for example, it's very hard to find good quality food in poor neighborhoods. It's just low quality food, cheap food, mass-produced food, which is actually poisonous to the population. But they've created this differentiation where healthy things and organic and sustainable things are considered to be premium products.
Yeah. And I think also that's why we need, the filmmakers to make these kind of behaviors or these kind of products very mainstream. They just talked about normally, so there is a higher demand. Currently it's a very smaller group, and you could say it's a chicken and egg. It's expensive, so fewer people buy it. But if there is a huge demand for this, businesses find it just lucrative to have a very huge market that is buying those products. So it works both ways, I would say.
I'll give you an example. Like if you buy normal bread here, it's 40 rupees a pound. You buy gluten-free bread, it's 350 rupees. In Australia, it's $2 for the normal bread, it's 250 for the gluten-free. Because there's that much of demand. It really boils down to that. How many people want to consume it? And the other thing is time is money. What you were saying, I'm oversimplifying that. It takes more time in this unsustainable world to create something sustainable. And they're basically charging you for the time they're putting in.
Yes, and also ethical practices. This is such a lovely question because everybody asks this. I'll answer from the point of view of fashion. You are paying your farmer, your weaver, your dyer, your every skilled labor right amount of money, fair wages, fair amount, living wages, not even minimum wages, so that we don't experience the Rana Plaza again. However, what we've gotten used to is fast fashion, Zara, which is not paying anybody any living wage, and we are getting very cheap products, which we put in a machine for the first time and it has holes. But we don't want to mend a Zara. We will mend something that's coming from an ethical source, which we've paid a lot for. We are going to just throw away the Zara and say, let me buy a new one. So that is the change between fast fashion and ethical living.
So thank you so much, guys, for being here. It has been an absolute pleasure, having our wonderful audience. We're just running out of time. So,
I think
okay,
we're
we'll
the
just
last
take...
panel of the day, and I don't
So,
think anyone cares.
all
We
right,
can
okay.
do a
So
little
just one question, yes. Or two questions.
Thanks. I'll do the first one. My name is Kunal. I'm the festival director of All Living Things Environmental Film Festival. And I'm curious to know, so, there's been made mention that there's so many stories out there that are both weaving environmental narratives, environmental characters, and all of that. We are in our fourth year now. We have 62 films in our festival this year. We had about 400 submissions from all over the world. I'm curious to know, what do we need more in the Indian context to get more writers doing more of this? It's a little bit ahead in the US with a lot of this happening. There's organizations popping up that are enabling, educating writers and professionals to do more of this. We had All That Breeds and Elephant Whisperers that have made it to the global circuit, against Tide this year. But what do you think we can do more? What more can we do to enable more of this happening? We think we're playing a role as an environmental film festival doing that, but I want to know if there's other things we can do as well.
So can I take a shot at this first, and then I think just the knowledge, of what climate and sustainability is about, So I was talking about the Hollywood Climate Summit. We need a gathering of filmmakers, communicators, scientists, people who work from different sectors who don't normally talk to each other. We have to facilitate that conversation, put them all together in one place. Do that in your next festival over 2 days, just create that and bring people who are not from within the industry but who work on the climate space. So, yeah, it could be that.
I think, sorry, I think it's really great. I mean, with something like this, if you're looking at writers, to really encourage, to create a space for them to, submit pitches where people from the industry can, collaborate with them, can judge their scripts, and maybe have a contest which will elevate, certain story ideas, which could then, kind of create a pipeline to reach people in the industry. I mean, almost use this sort of institutional prestige of your festival, which, has got to the point where you're getting hundreds of submissions from all over the world, to create a workshop or a forum or a submission process where young people in particular, could, or emerging writers could submit stories which have these specific, themes. You're creating a space for that to then, kind of be a launch pad, let's say, for some of these ideas to make it through the various gatekeepers. Because I think for, new writers especially, it's very hard for people to read their scripts, to find a place where they can be heard. If you provide that space, they'll definitely come for it, especially, if you're able to amplify it through partnerships, etc., where people can find out about it. Sometimes it's a little too complicated. Maybe you don't need to have the completed script. Maybe they could submit a treatment 3-pager or something like that, so that the threshold to participation is not as high as, I'm going to complete this whole feature script and I won't be part of it, and I've wasted all the, months doing it. So I think things like that. I don't know, Devashish maybe has some thoughts on it, but because he's more in that space. But I do feel like there's a really, in terms of writers, it's, I think they are looking for these type of opportunities, and it can be really, because your festival has that specific theme, you've already got a lot of credibility, and you're sort of a magnet for people who are already interested in those kind of things. And I do believe in the industry there are a lot of people who would be receptive to that.
So thank you. One last question, and then we wind up.
Thank you for taking the time to answer my question. So, as we know, the film industry is one of the most polluting industries in the world, and it, is one of the biggest contributors to greenhouse emissions. And as Bollywood or just the Indian film industries, we put out more than 1,000 films a year, so that's an immense amount of emissions. So I was just wondering, are there practices that you've seen within the industry that you feel that we can change, or like do you think we can move forward as an industry in a way that sort of is less detrimental to the planet, and how do we stay authentic to the art while doing so as well?
Who wants to attempt that?
It's a really difficult conversation, because within the Indian industry especially, it's the 28 language industries, and then within each language industry there is the mainstream and then there is the artistic. And I think the artistic independent filmmakers are not the ones who are creating the emission. It's the Bahubalis and the RRRs of the world. How do we hold them accountable for something like this when they need to operate at a scale that large to be able to, reach the kind of audiences they want to? So what I'm going to try and answer both of you together. I think these places where these conversations are happening need those producers in the room as well, because we are having our conversations in little echo chambers, and they continue to actually not care about the carbon footprint that they leave. So if these gaps get bridged, as writers, and I am sitting on 16 scripts that have these kind of themes in them, no one wants to make them. So young writers can write till the cows come home and turn into beef, but those films won't get made. The producers need to be in the room. The people with the big money need to be in the room, because they are the ones who can actually set the clock back. Because no matter how hard we try, we can't initiate a change at that scale.
All right. Thank you so much, Devashish, for that. I think time is up, so if you have any further questions, we can just discuss that with all of you. I want to once again, thank our wonderful panelists, for making the time and, coming here and sharing their insights on this very difficult topic. And thank you to the audience, thank you for being here and very patiently listening and, asking very relevant questions. And please do, forward the mission, that we all need of, telling the greatest story that can ever be told. It is the story of climate change. Thank you, everybody.
So there's a line on the screen that I think we can wrap with. It says, press DEL to reset and ESC to exit.
How lovely. It's perfect.